Hello, everybody, and welcome to Tuesday. My name is Kelly Baltzell, and I'm the owner and CEO of Beyond Indigo Pets. And today we are going to focus on a little bit what we call marketing to self segment, which means what do we do for ourselves? What are the things we tell ourselves to kind of get through the day? Because really, we're our biggest audience. So we have our director of client services, Elyse Phillips, but she's not talking about client services today. She is going to talk about one of her hobbies, and it's important when you're trying to find a life-work balance is to find something that fulfills you in other buckets of life than work, right? And that replenishes you, and that also should be fun and brings you joy, right? And that's different for everybody. And Elyse has a really kind of different one that she does as a hobby, and she's here to explain it today. So Elyse, tell us what it is, how you got into it, and then you have some pretty cool things to show us. And I'd like you to tell people which ones you personally made as well.
Okay. Yeah, so I work with miniatures. I make them and I collect them. And I hesitate to tell people like dollhouse miniatures because I think people sort of think that I'm playing with dolls. In the past, it was dioramas that people would do historically. And it experienced a resurgence kind of in the 70s and 80s. Now we are trying to find more people to be interested in the hobby. This room that you're seeing right now, I recently completed for my mom. I made most of the things in it, including the room box itself. It's something that I've been doing really my whole life. I think as a little girl, I dabbled in it. Now I try to make things look a little bit more realistic. I work primarily in 1/12 scale, so 1 inch in miniature equals 1 foot. Other common scales are 1/2 inch equals a foot, or 1/4 inch equals a foot. Or you'll see some, if you could imagine like a dollhouse for a dollhouse size that we'll be looking at in a few minutes and talking about. So this is the sewing shop that I recently made. You can see the little iPad there. And my favorite things are the details, like the pencil or the masking tape that's sitting there. That box has money in it that was printed and cut out and crumpled up so it looks real. And for me, even if you can't really see it in there, you kind of know it's there. So it adds to the realism. Yeah. And a lot of found items. The enjoy the little things on the wall was actually a scrapbook sticker that made a great wall hanging. So you learn to have a miniaturist's eye for things. There's a close-up of the counter, various scissors that I semi-collected, some I made. Same thing with the measuring tape, some I collected and some I made. The buttons are in a little basket there, a box of Kleenex and doilies. It's fun to see it all together. And then this, as I mentioned, this is the dollhouse for dollhouse scale. So it's 1/144th. Size. So that was something that I put together in a class at the Midwest Miniature Guild that I belong to. That's the other side of that. And I also took a course and I actually dyed the paper for these and then punched all the petals individually and then created these peonies, which was fascinating. And the hydrangeas were made with some fluff kind of stuff that you dip in. Those are actually really quick to do. The other, I actually wove the wicker for the cornucopia and then made all the flowers individually also. There's a close-up of the cornucopia with the paper flowers in it. And this was a new sort of project for me. This was a paper house done 3-dimensionally, along with some landscaping materials in there in a watch case. And this is another wicker project. I'm lucky to have a friend from the Miniature Guild who teaches wicker. This is my very first project, so it's a little crooked, but I was impressed that it at least looks somewhat like a tea cart. That's actually woven out of kind of a sticky sort of a string. That was probably a 20-hour project for me. For somebody who was more experienced, it might have been a little less, but it was many hours. And then this is just a little video to kind of give you an idea of the scale of the last room that I created. And then one of my favorite parts of it, I don't know why, but is the open and closed sign that I made for the door. Also one of the easiest things that I made in it. But we're going to see that next in a little video.
So I saw most of these in person because we actually live 10 feet apart. But the room that you made for your mom, you told me some things and I was just blown away because it looked like it came off the set of a movie. So you actually made little bolts of cloth and put little tiny stickers on the end to say what type of cloth it was, so that if she pulled the little bolt out, it looked just like if you went to a cloth store. You cut the cloth just so, and you wrapped it around the ends. You wrapped all the bobbins on tiny little bobbins. You did all of that. How long did that box take you?
Well, years-wise, it took me about 5 years, but hours-wise, it was probably a couple hundred hours. Many of the smaller items in it, like there's a sewing box, and the sewing box itself with all of the things in it was probably a 15 or 20 hour project. And so there are each of those sorts of items. Making the fabric bolts was as a sit in front of the TV and kind of wind fabric bolts and stick things on it. But that was also the fabric bolts were probably another 15 or 20 hours by the time that was all done. There was a little bulletin board in it that has actual photos of my family that I reduced down, and so that but those are the touches that make it so wonderful, right? That
Right.
make it feel real, and also make it feel personal. But all of those, many of the individual projects are kind of in that 10 to 20 hour range, and add up to probably an estimate of a couple of hundred hours for the box.
And do you use a magnifying glass?
I am fortunate at this point in my life to not have to use a magnifying glass. I do use natural light a lot. I have a big light that I make sure that I've got when you're working in that tiny, any kind of a shadow just really can throw things off. So I have a feeling the magnifying glass is coming very soon.
And you were talking about different scale size. Is that something you just fall into by preference, or that you just kind of like model your whole focus on, like as you're building these things? Like, tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, so I would say most everyone starts out in that 1/12 scale. The 1 inch equals 1 foot. It's the easiest to understand because an inch equals a foot. So that makes sense. Honestly, I think the reason that most people start to work in smaller and smaller scales is they run out of space. And the smaller it is, the less space it takes up. So, a big house, I've got a giant one in the basement that's being worked on, is probably, mine is maybe 5 feet across and 3 feet deep. But this house that would fit inside that house as a dollhouse, one of my upcoming projects is to actually make the furniture kits for this to be able to fill it with furniture, but that takes up much less space. And then the sort of sizes in between. This is an example of a quarter scale, so 1/4 of an inch equaling a foot. So I think it becomes a space thing. And then people really, we'll do projects in various scales.
And like you said, you guys are trying to breathe in some more life to this hobby, right? Because I think there's some stereotypes with it that are not necessarily true, that I have learned because of you, right? Who do you think, personality-wise, this is a good hobby for?
I think people who are who like puzzles or those sorts of real detail kind of oriented tasks or hobbies already. I think there's been a resurgence a little bit with it, not in necessarily this kind of diorama room way. You have seen like little earrings or necklaces that are something in miniature. Fairy gardens are all types of miniatures. And I think, right now what we're struggling with a little bit is that the median age of the people with doing this hobby has been older. In our guild, they're older. And so we're really trying to attract a younger population in. And I think the secret to that and what we're tapping into is, especially with COVID going on, right? We're all doing these projects at home and reaching out to people online and being able to really have a larger miniatures community instead of just what you have locally. And 3D printers, I just bought some 3D printer things. They're really cool. And I think that's a younger crowd that is more interested in that part of it.
So that's pretty cool. So if people wanted to get into this, where do they go?
Well, here in Minnesota, you can visit midwestminiatureguild.org if you want to join the Midwest Miniature Guild. Otherwise, I would look for a local group. NAME, NAME, is the miniature enthusiasts group that you can join, and also has information on local groups. Unfortunately, a lot of the stores have closed. So really searching online is your best bet.
Yeah, that would be true, because you used to go to conventions too, and those aren't happening.
Absolutely. Right, we canceled 2 of our 3 meetings this year for the group that I'm involved in already.
Yeah, but it's a strong network. Like, you were showing me a hand sanitizer somebody made. So there are people who have specialties that do make things, right? And if
it is, absolutely. Yep.
It is.
Getting in the COVID groove, right? Little tiny hand sanitizer.
Well, that's awesome. Well, thank you so much for sharing your hobby.
You're welcome. Thank you for letting me share.
Beautiful work. So I just am always like, you made that? Seriously? That's like, seriously? So you have a talent. So thank you for sharing it with us today.
Thank you.